people at Merrill who had, back then in the late 80s and through the 90s, only high school degrees. And people who rose from the ranks of, call them secretaries or executive assistants. Like one of the very sharpest people I worked at Merrill was this young woman who didn't go to college, got a secretary's job at age 17 or 18 right out of high school, and within like 2 years she essentially was a budget analyst. And she's the one who was sent with me by my mentor Ed O'Connor as the package deal when he sent me to be that controller. Well, he sent this woman with me because she knew budgeting and all that. This was her, and it was all learned on the job. Well, she also knew that getting a college degrees would help her further advancement, so she was very ambitious. So went to night classes to get first a bachelor's degree and then an MBA. And now, you know, if what she posts on LinkedIn is entirely accurate and not overblown, she apparently has moved up, you know, several levels, is working at in some sort of high net worth brokerage operation that Merrill Lynch has in Dallas. You know, by all appearances, she's doing quite well.
Around that same time, back in the 80s, my mom, she came from the islands, from Grenada, and although she had a high school diploma there, when she came here, she had to do a GED, and she was able to secure an accounting position with what was Chemical Bank then, it's Chase now. She was able to become an accountant.
But this is without an accounting degree.
This is without it. I mean, she ended up doing her accounting degree, but she got the job with just a GED here.
This is essentially the dilemma you all face. You know, a lot of these positions, you have a smart person who knows numbers and whatnot, and you give that person the right on-the-job training. Doing a lot of these internal accounting type jobs in this corporation does not normally require an accounting degree. But if you're somebody coming off the street that they don't know, you know, this is essentially an easier way to vet people. I think there's something we also talked about in the office ahead of time that, you know, I hope we keep these names straight. Jeff Bennett, the former divisional CFO at Merrill Lynch, who's now teaching Latin, he always talked about pedigrees. He said, look, the college degrees, he said, like he was a Dartmouth grad and Harvard MBA. It's all pedigrees. Gets you in the door. He says, once you're here, you got to prove your stuff. He said that just maybe helps you get an extra look, maybe makes you a more attractive candidate to get hired. But once you're in, well, in most corporations, you have to produce results. I mean, and he was pointing to like people who went to much less prestigious colleges, people with just high school degrees who know their stuff, who achieve results on the job and advance.
Of course, now the market has become so competitive.
No, even
that's much tougher.
Right.
People with a high school diploma, they drop out of college. Branch manager in Chase. I know some people.
Oh, really? So they dropped out. You mean they had the position as they were
as a teller
college,
when he was
and
18, and at age 23 he became a branch manager.
But can he go? You know, he can't go much.
I don't think so. He probably got promoted, I don't know.
Do you think an MBA, you know, do you recommend getting it? I mean.
You know, here again is, you know, here's the problem. How much of, well, let's put it this way, how much of what I learned as an MBA I really needed?
Oh, really?
Zero.
Because
Seriously.
you had some time between.
Yeah, I did, but you know, it's a bit, but a lot of it was, so much of it was on the job training, just based on what I got. I seriously, just based on what I got out of Regis High School. If you gave me the proper on the job training, I could have got this stuff. Right? It certainly helped that I started out a specialized field at Western Electric, where the actually academic background in economics, which is not a high school level subject, and the more specialized work in econometrics, which I took one course in as a Harvard undergrad, and was it one, you know, a few other courses at Wharton. Well, let's see, I'm hemming and hawing a bit. At Wharton, the consistently best courses I took at Wharton were in an area that technically I never worked in, operations research. I don't know what that means. It's essentially advanced mathematical techniques as applied to business. And again, and remember, we are talking here that I'm in the dark ages before the personal computer and whatnot. where the classes I attended, you have to solve these very complex algorithms, what they call linear programming algorithms, by hand on paper. Now, did I ever use any of the stuff I learned in those operations research courses? And I took at least 2 and maybe 3, I'll have to rack my brains. But those were consistently the best taught courses I attended, Ward, and they were really, really difficult to get through. But it developed a certain mental discipline about mathematical modeling. It probably raised my game a notch or 2 in terms of being numerate, but specifically, did I ever use the skills I developed in those OR courses? No, and I think, and outside a few buzzwords like linear programming and whatnot, I remember nothing. But it's maybe just the basic discipline, just maybe like studying Latin in high school is also one of the very best things that did in high school. Is part of the required curriculum regis of how much do I use Latin data, not that, but the discipline of mind that it inculcated was very important and very valuable. So, you know, I don't know if that answer is satisfying. You know, to get some of these higher level jobs, it's like, well, yeah, that's a box you have to tick. To actually do the job, do you need the MBA? No. In most cases, no. That's unfortunately the employment world we're in today. And again, the issue becomes, this is another topic of discussion in the office. You know, forgive me if I've mentioned this previously in our talk today. The problem you're faced, you're going into an employer who doesn't know you from Adam, and so then it's a tick the box exercise. Once you get your foot in the door, and this is sort of what Jeff Bennett was talking about in his pedigrees talk, then you're known to people. People see you within that company. They see what you can do. They can talk directly to your manager to find out what are your strengths and all that. If you've made an effort to network and to get involved in cross-functional teams, expose yourself to people in other work groups and more particularly to managers in other work groups, you get yourself known, then all those credentials become irrelevant. You know, that's when I'm going for another job within Merrill. They ask me, well, where'd you go to college? It's irrelevant. It's, oh, you worked for Ed O'Connor. Oh, yeah, you did this for Ed. Yeah, man, Ed had a real bang-up department, and you were part of that. Yeah, that's what counts.
It's kind of like when you finish high school, and you've done all these things in high school, and now that'll never be on your resume again. And now and then you get your first position, and everything you did before that.
Yeah, and it's also the issue of both, you know, legal environment and whatnot. Because within a company, it's much easier to pick up the phone, you know, like in Merrill. If say I'm looking for a different job there, you know, and either working for or have worked for Ed O'Connor, and this manager knows that, hey, you know, how's Mark? You know, do you have anything on the wall? It's all great things and such, but it's much tougher to do if I'm trying to come from another company. They're not going to pick up the phone to whoever I work for in that company because first of all, the manager in my current company is going to be, who are you calling from the outside? You trying to get me to say something defamatory about this person, in which case I and my company can be sued. They're going to be very defensive, and that's why. And this is one of the. In fact, one of the articles I'm publishing on my About.com site in December is talking about the difficulty for hiring managers in verifying resumes. Because all you're going to get if you call somebody's previous employer, Susie worked here from January 1st, 1983 to June 2nd, 1991, and her final salary was X, and have a good day. You know, that's as much as you're going to get out of it. And so I've seen, I'm telling you to do this, but I've seen unscrupulous people that take advantage of it. I know if this gets, this is one of the juicier stories that I know if this was also part of our selections. I had a case study in my book that I called The Curious Case of Wonder Woman.
Oh, yes.
And this woman is still at a high position. This woman did not know from beans. At least my friend Zorro was a fairly smart guy. Yeah, you know, he got ahead that he was very astute politically. Knew where to steer from trouble. He had the mind like a steel trap for the buzzwords and whatnot. But this Wonder Woman, you know, she doesn't know from beans. She averages like a new employer every second or third year. And again, this is a woman now in her late 50s who can't keep a job or doesn't keep a job for more than 2, and you wonder why anybody hires her. But what we learned when she came into Merrill Lynch, and I also have an article scheduled to publish on about.com in December. What did she do to put herself ahead of the pack? She hired a personal publicist. So this personal publicist interacts with people in various publications like the Podunk Echo, and even fairly respectable things like Crane's Business. But you find that a lot of these reporters in these smaller business publications, you wonder how much real understanding of the subject they have and whether they're just regurgitating press releases. So these are names you probably would recognize, but Professor Mann will recognize a lot of, like, the most celebrated women on Wall Street back in the 90s, like Mary Meeker, who was a securities analyst, I think with Morgan Stanley, and was it Heidi Joseph Cohn, if I'm getting, Abby Joseph Cohn, who's another securities analyst. Well, Wonder Woman's press agent would get her, who nobody outside the firm she worked for had ever heard of, mentioned her with the same breath as people like Abby Joseph Cohn and Mary Meeker. Right. And all of a sudden Merrill Lynch was saying, what kind of, but apparently, just trying to connect the dots here, and she's trying to sell herself to these companies. She's Wall Street, these press clippings, and whoever the hiring managers at Merrill Lynch were, don't be enough to take these at face value. And she's still playing this game since leaving Merrill Lynch. She's again averaging like a new employer every 2 to 3 years. And the thing was, when you actually talked to her in a company, she didn't seem to know from beans. She never had time for any conversation beyond hello. And my immediate manager, for whom I was acting, this is when I was in the market research role, my immediate manager, the woman herself, was then nested under Wonder Woman. She'd come into me after Wonder Woman's staff meeting and say, Mark, I can't believe it. First of all, Wonder Woman doesn't even attend her own staff meetings. She hires an outside consultant to run her staff meeting. I'm going crazy. What is this character doing?
Oh, that's pretty brilliant, man. Wow.
I know, yeah. But you also see stuff like this, like I see her, I just tried check, because her name suddenly popped in my head, like out of nowhere for the last 10 years, about a week or so ago, so maybe 2 weeks ago. So I went searching on, I just Googled her, and there she comes up again in these articles about the top women on Wall Street and whatnot. And then I look at the current company she's at, a leading banking firm, and it has her bio there. And this is apropos to vetting the resumes. Now again, don't do this yourself because it's dishonest, and if you get caught, but sometimes she gets away with this. She's making claims that are blatantly untrue, that she founded a given area at Merrill Lynch, where all that happened was at Merrill Lynch was that area which she was brought into head, got reorganized and changed its name. Now I don't know what your concept of founded is. My concept is she founded, this didn't exist, she created this out of whole cloth. Nonsense, it already existed. People not checking, they ask anyway, I worked on it, founded it, nonsense. They just changed the name. Excuse me?
I'm saying, not that that's what you do, but I'm saying that you have a platform and you can sort of out her if you wanted to.
Well, but then you get into things like, possible legal liability if she sues, she buys deeper pockets than me. But that's essentially what I'm doing in a roundabout fashion. You read my articles in December, which you'll never see, of course, or I don't know if a publicist will read. But essentially saying, at Merrill Lynch, without naming a name, I ran into somebody who did all this, hired personal publicists, who's now claiming to have founded departments which were not founded under her watch. They were just renamed and reorganized.
But here she is, a woman around 50, and she
more than 50, she's even more mature than she.
She could have learned from all these experiences, and yet she's spending all her time fabricating.
Well,
instead of
she's essentially been running a hustle now for the last 35 years or so, and people are still and major corporations are still falling for the con. And you see when she goes to totally unrelated. So she starts out as a, if I'm trying to get this right, essentially I think a securities research analyst with a major investment banking firm. Then she, I may have this out of sequence. Then she gets a job at Sotheby's art auction house. Huh? Lasts like a year there, so you wonder what really happened there. Probably failed miserably. Then winds up in the private banking department of another major bank that gets into Merrill Lynch, and must have had something on somebody in Merrill Lynch, because I understand that she was fired by her immediate superior, whose name you will recognize, James Gorman, who's the chairman and CEO of Morgan Stanley. She was reporting to him at one point. He fired her. But then he was overruled by the then CEO of Merrill Lynch, Stan O'Neill, the next day. So she must have something on O'Neill, is the only thing I can think of. That why O'Neill reinstated her. But Lord knows, you know, she must have had the tapes and the pictures and everything. I don't know. But anyway, we digress a bit. But this is sort of like, if you will, an extreme take on networking, and as people starting out hiring a publicist, well, you know, that's kind of old. And what can they really write that anyone would believe? But once you get to a certain level, you know what? This woman's example, even for people who are completely above board, may make sense. Because here again is the problem. How do you insinuate yourself into a new company? And this is one like the press releases. Like, oh, Jim Crane's New York Business says you're the greatest.
Well, I just heard a student the other day in the elevator saying that he just spent $500 with a coach that helped him reformulate his cover letter and his resume. So that's kind of on a smaller scale, on a very different scale, but it's that same logic that, you know, somebody is going to give you that perfect package that you can then use to get yourself.
You know, and a different age, even though, you know, my father had his own colorful vocabulary. What he used to call, and this was sort of the issue, getting yourself into the college of your choice and getting yourself into the grad school of your choice. He always used to say, he always used to talk in terms of picking up endorsements, sort of thing politically. So it's sort of like saying the governor endorses you running for mayor. It was that sort of thing, you know. If you could sort of get, if you somehow had something to do with somebody who might have a serious position in a company or in politics and whatnot, have to write a letter of endorsement, or they just slap these down like playing cards in a card game. Look at all these endorsements I had. And some hiring managers or admissions personnel get impressed by that. You know?
But then if you have nothing to say after that, you know, as you say, it can get you into some doors,
Right.
But then the next day, right, you have to.
Well, you know, again, this wonder, well, what I still wonder, I really would like to have been a fly on the wall of these things, because again, you know, it was universal. My immediate superior, she said that Wonder Woman was vapid and devoid of ideas. You know, once it gets beyond, hello, here are my press clippings.
Was she a good communicator, though? Was she able to present herself in such a way that?
I was never, she always, the few times I ran across her, she was always doing PR type stuff. A few times I ran across her as somebody in her organization, was not a very compelling person in very good. No, you know, give you a big smile and big veneer, or yeah, I'm in charge and whatnot, but there was, you know, how's that word? No there. What they say about men in empty suit, you know, when you wear suits, an empty suit, you know, that sort of thing. I know, it really baffled me, baffled my immediate boss, baffled everyone I talked to in Merrill who had dealt with this sort of thing. How'd you get, you know, this is absolute mind-boggling. But anyway, you're all here to be highly competent, so you know, you can't play this game. You have to be competent. So
how about any questions that come up, maybe from something you read that, or something about the field that you'd like to go in, or internships, what to do, how to do it?
Well, first, what actually made you write a book about all of this?
Well, you know what? What it came down to was, I left Merrill Lynch in 2001 because things were making a turn from the worst. Merrill had posted record profits in the year 2000, was riding high, but then all of a sudden in 2001 there was a big market downturn, and this unfortunate firms on Wall Street are very manic depressive in this way. Is that when the trend is up, profits are up, let's hire, we don't know what we're going to do with them, let's hire people and we'll figure it out later. And then it was like this. Merrill had had a record year in terms of profits in 2000, and then January and February 2001 were showing the downtrend. Then it was the opposite. Holy moly, this is a downturn, we gotta fire everyone. And it's like Merrill Lynch essentially seesawed during my time there between 40,000 and 60,000 employees. So 20,000 people would either be laid off or added in each market cycle. Absolutely insane. So the downturn was starting. And I saw cultural changes starting to brew that I did not. I didn't get to corporate culture and whatnot. Merrill Lynch, one of the internal nicknames for Merrill for many years, I hope I'm not being too prolix in answering this, but I think so I'll add some. The old core business of Merrill Lynch, retail stock brokerage, that core part of the firm, employees always used to call it Mother Merrill. Because out of all the Wall Street firms, and this is an interesting comment by forgetting his first name, Levitt. He was chairman of the Securities Exchange, Arthur Levitt. He was chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission in the 90s in the Clinton administration. And he had an interesting comment once, which says Merrill Lynch is real proud of. He says, of all the firms on Wall Street and financial industry, only Merrill Lynch actually had a soul. Now that is a very interesting comment. That was the Mother Merrill environment, where it was look out for each other. It was a culture of you're a good performer, you would actually spend your career there. It was typical of people who they are 20, 30 years, have family members working for the firm. That was the basic culture. It was, you know, it's a Wall Street firm, so it was very fast paced and expected to produce, but there actually was how should I say, some degree of nurturing environment. And I remember, and these stories were corroborated as true from people who know that, the very first time Merrill ever laid anyone off was in 1987. That's when that cycle of 40,000 to 60,000 started. And the then President and Chief Operating Officer Daniel P. Tully, who later became Chairman and CEO, because Merrill was also known for a very orderly succession. Somebody who had been previously a broker and then moved into the management ranks in brokerage, who eventually come up through management, become President and Chief Operating Officer, so-called Mr. Inside, who's concerned about operational details, to complement somebody else who rose up through that same chain, who was Chairman and CEO, would be the Mr. Outside, essentially interacting with regulators, the general public and whatnot. So at that time, William Schreier, Bill Schreier, who had himself started as a broker, was Chairman and CEO. Dan Tully was his number two as President and COO. Then the orderly succession Merrill had at the time. When Schreier retired, Tully moved to the top spot. But at that time, 1987, we had the big market crash of 87. Before the time, you would remember, the Dow dropped something like 25% in one day. There was great panic on the street and among investors. Bill Schreier's Mr. Outside got on all the network news programs up front as a spokesman for the industry, saying, let's not panic here, you know, the American economy's down, blah, blah, blah. It really helped calm the waters. But Merrill's results were taking a serious hit, and reluctantly they decided the very first time they'd lay off people. Dan Tully, this is the big lineup, Dan Tully, I'm told by people I know who are reliable, who actually worked with him at the time, said, he actually went over every single name on the layoff list. He actually agonized over that. Because Mother Merrill, he knew the vast, down in the bowels of the firm, he knew the vast majority of these people. In many cases, he called them personally to give his regrets. Fast forward to 2001, culture's on the cusp of a change. We have a downturn there, and a lot of the, how shall I say, old-time people who had been Merrill Lynch all their careers, like Lonnie Steffens, whose name I mentioned, had been the head of the retail brokerage half of Merrill Lynch for something like 20 years up to that point. His job is in jeopardy. He essentially gets shunted into a dead-end corporate job with a fancy title, no responsibility. What, you know, some people call the Aloha Sweep. You know, it's essentially all power's taken away from him. He's still being paid, but him line, it's time to think about your vineyards in California, and the guy, and you could see really starting to amassed power there is this fellow Stan O'Neill, who became chairman and CEO in the early 2000s. And then it started coming, you know, O'Neill's vision of the firm, it started coming out that he felt, and these are snippets that came my way, that anyone who was with the firm more than a few years must be something wrong with them. Contrary of the Mother Merrill. If you're not constantly shopping yourself around like Wonder Woman, you know, he actually thought people like Wonder Woman were the ideal hire. Somebody who's constantly on the move, constantly hustling, you know, hustle in sort of in both the good and the bad sense, running the hustle as well as hustling around. Those are the people you want. These are the aggressive people. These are people with stuff to offer. People have been around with Merrill for more than, say, 3 or 4 years. Must be something wrong with them. Because if they're that good and that marketable, they would have gone somewhere else. So then O'Neill really starts a campaign. I could see just the beginnings of it, to start purging long-time employees and then bringing in people like ridiculous. You put a guy in a key, and this is absolutely true, in a key position within the retail brokerage force. This guy, Matt Gardner, who previously had marketed bras and girdles at Playtex. And he's made head of retail brokerage essentially. I mean, what is going on here? Well, but you know, and this Gardner guy was really a vicious guy. He used to scream at people, throw chairs on up from I hear, verbally abuse people, and say, you know, this company's going in a very bad direction. So they were layoffs were in the offing. They were offering buyout packages. And I raised my hand. I said, you know what? Give me a package. And they're also going to redefine my job into doing essentially some trivial stuff. I'm out of here. You know, this woman over here who has some kids actually needs a job. They're going to push her out. I said, keep her. Give me the package. I'm out of here. It's time for the next phase of my life. And it turned out being a good call because O'Neill came close to simpling the company because Merrill was a very conservative firm that did not want to take risky bets on the market, and O'Neill really he and his aggressive types really turned Merrill Lynch into sort of a casino type place, and you know the firm nearly went belly up in the crisis of 2008 and had to be bought out by Bank of America, and then O'Neill himself was on the bricks by then too, and he's essentially been unhireable. But I sort of smelled that things were going in the wrong direction, so that was the time to leave. And well, okay, so no, I really haven't answered you to say why the book. Well, what my long-term goal, what I always really want to do in my life is be a writer. But of course, it's tough to make a living as a writer. So I started testing the water. So I was still at Merrill, trying to contribute pieces on a freelance basis to newspapers and magazines. It was a tough haul, but I figured, well, you know, if I devote myself to it full time, it'd be easier. Well, no, it hasn't been any easier trying to market myself. But talking to one of my friends from college, who runs the small press which published it, Bamboo Books, you know, I had a discussion with him, and we somehow got onto this topic. I say, you know, John, you know, there's so many experiences I've had in the business world that if I only knew this when I was like back in high school, back in undergrad, all this stuff I learned in School of Hard Knocks by experience, if only I understood the way the business world really works, I probably would have managed my own career a whole lot better. So I should write a book about that. So yeah, and then it didn't like, the book didn't manifest itself in an orderly fashion because we talked about this back in 2001. When I was editing for him a book of memoirs of a Chinese woman about her experiences in China under Mao called On the Great Wall. I was editing this and dealing with the author who's based in Beijing. And so that's when we talked about my book idea. And to be honest, I just spun my wheels on it for several years. It's not really until, say, 2006, 5 years later, I kid you not, that I actually hunkered down and thought, you know what, instead of thinking of this, you know, that old Chinese proverb, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step, or however that goes. I say, well, you know what, rather than think, oh, gee, you know, how do I write this book, this big thing, organize? Well, just organize. I got the idea of case studies based on experiences in my life, and just write them up, so like standalone article. And actually, I wrote essentially 75% of that book within 5 days' time. When I finally hunkered down, it just started flowing. And hasn't sold very many copies, that's why I'm always grateful. It winds up in college libraries, and college libraries and whatnot, get some notoriety. But the other thing that did is, that then became a bona fide that helped me get my current position with About.com, right, about financial careers. And not that really pays any money at all. That's more hobby and pin money than anything that really earns you money. There may be only a handful of our writers who can really make a living at it, who generate enough, because we're paid based on traffic. As finances is a relatively niche topic as compared to stuff like job searching and career planning and even human resources. But long story short, that's maybe a bit windier than you'd want, but that's how I came to write the book.
Someone from one of the other classes had a question that kind of segues nicely.
Yeah.
About how would you advise students who'd like to go into their own business, or someone who'd like to be an entrepreneur? What kind of advice would you give, given that you've made that move yourself?
Oh, gee. Well, the problem is because you are taking a lot of risk. So it certainly helps. Don't fly blind into something that you have no hands-on experience with. You see so many people fail at this. They just think something sounds like a good idea, like great examples, the restaurant business. And this fellow here, we talked to her in the restaurant, I'm sure you can vouch for this. It's a really tough business to make a buck at. And you just see the turn. You really first got to get don't think you're going to something which you have no experience, right? And if you're going to make it go, you got to get hands-on experience and hopefully not just try to insinuate yourself at some sort of managerial level of which you're sort of above the fray, because this is something I saw in all the companies with AT&T and Merrill. You have executives floating up here who have really no clue, nuts and bolts, what's going on. And we see this at Merrill. Here's an example from the Stan O'Neill years that we got a chuckle at it. Every week, there's a tradition at Merrill which the CEO would be on what they call direct broadcast, essentially a closed-circuit TV hookup with people throughout the company. And most of the people who would be involved in that, essentially Q&A, called town hall is the phrase they use nowadays. He'd make some statements and other execs would be with him, and it'd be mainly to field calls from the brokers, concerns they had. I remember after one round of layoffs late in my career at Merrill, this broker is yelling at O'Neill saying, you know what, there's this key department there that deals with clients who have preferred stocks, and you fired everyone there, and so now our clients can't get their questions answered. They're up in arms. They're leaving the firm, and O'Neill's it's so far below his rare. He just says lay people off, and yeah, then guess what? It's actually the people who make the company go, the $30,000 a year clerks in that preferred stock department, who are given the heave-ho, and then the essential work of the firm can't get done. There's another roundabout way of saying, you really should endeavor to learn top to bottom whatever business interests you. Get your hands dirty. You see that if you ever watch, the TV show Undercover Boss, of people who are at high levels and have no clue whatsoever of what's going on. And of course, that's highly sanitized because with the company. But you see, isn't that a recurring theme? Gee, and even people who had risen through the ranks had forgotten how the work actually gets. Oh, gee, I didn't realize our computer systems don't work. Gee, I didn't realize our inventory systems send you all this junk that nobody buys in the store. You really have to learn the business top to bottom. And it's like never, ever dip your toe into unless it's something you can pull off with like no capital requirement and no risk. And I'll give you an example here. This goes back to my friend who runs the publishing firm who published my book, Bamboo Books. That's actually a sideline for him. And actually Bamboo Books, as the name may imply, it's really because he spent a year with an organization called ISEC, it's a French acronym for Association of Students in Economics and Commerce, an international organization that was facilitate internships abroad. And this guy went on an internship in Japan and really fell in love with Japanese culture. So his idea was to create this press, and this is more like a secondary business venture, a press dealing with topics in East Asian language and culture. Currently, he's working on a book trying to give a basic primer in Chinese characters to somebody who doesn't understand Chinese. But his main background is his family were major real estate developers. And I'm going to tell you what part of the country. First, they were steamship operators, and you believe this, excursion boats. Then when the excursion boat business, like the Hudson River Dayliner, and they owned the Hudson River Dayliner at one point, they had owned the Statue of Liberty ferry at one point, they had earned, they even though they're not from the New York area, they had owned excursion boat companies around the country for a number of years. But when that business became less attractive in the 1960s, they then switched to real estate. So this guy's background is in real estate. Now, given that background in real estate, working at the family firm, he got this thought when the internet was in its infancy in the mid-90s. He was thinking of the internet in terms of real estate. You know, the old mantra, location, location, location. So the idea popped in as I said, gee, if I could corner all these URLs in a given topic area, sort of corner all the prime real estate, I may have a profitable opportunity. And what he thought in terms of is travel, because the guy loves to travel. He regularly makes trips to Europe, and he's a very frugal guy. Very man after my own heart. He goes to Europe, he doesn't even stay in hotels, he stays in youth hostels. And he's into like backpacking, riding the bicycle. For a guy who came from a fairly well-to-do family, he's extremely frugal, unostentatious. And so based on his interest in travel and all that and foreign cultures, he got, the bug bit me, said, from his real estate background, what if I corner the market in URLs that locate to destinations and use that as a gateway to people booking hotels? So he doesn't, even though I'm essentially his consultant, I advise him on business things, because he's never worked in a large corporation for more than a nanosecond. So certain things I learned in terms of controls and procedures are revelations to him as an entrepreneur. Even in terms of what he learned in the family real estate firm, it surprised me that what I learned in the corporate world is so light years beyond that in terms of sophistication. But his notion was, yeah, travel booking. So he wouldn't even tell me how many of these URLs he has. So if you try URLs like NewYorkHotels.com, CaliforniaHotels.com, BerlinHotels.com, RomeHotels.com, Europe Hotel, it must be hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of these URLs. In the early days of the internet, he grabbed them. And then what it's kind of been since then, essentially, he's had a strategy for essentially building out behind that an infrastructure for actually delivering hotel booking. And his whole theory was, remember, the early days of the internet, you know, you're all used to the very sophisticated browsers we have today, like Google, where
Most people think, Berlin.
Where you'd actually put in the search box, put in Berlin Hotel, and it might even, hey, you start typing in Berlin, it might give you the suggest Berlin. But this is even before that, when we had Netscape and much more primitive browsers. He was thinking in terms of people who just on a lark figuring there probably is a website out there called BerlinHotels.com, or NewYorkHotels.com, and so that's the type of traffic he looked to get. It's an entirely different competitive landscape now, but somehow he still manages to do well. But sort of long story short, yeah, he went into a different field, but he was anticipating that his web-based venture, that there would be some transferable skills and knowledge from his experience in real estate with the family firm, and whatever was his initial outlay to buy up these URLs, I presume, was not all that great compared to how much money he had in the bank. So he figured it was worth the world. And now, 20 years later, he's still doing it, so I assume he's still earning him a decent return. So yeah, long story short, yeah, don't fly blind into any entrepreneurial activity unless it's got like next to zero capital cost and it's an investment you could afford to lose.
We have a student I heard from after a few years who started a Brooklyn-based tourism business, and he's doing very well. He has a few people working for him now, And he said to me the big mistake that he made, he said, I should have worked, he did it right after college, and he made lots of mistakes, and he learned, and he lost money, and now he's doing well, but he said, I should have worked for 2 years at one of the big tour companies, you know,
Right.
doing that, and learning and making
Right,
mistakes.
yeah, and of course also note, you know, that they don't always do everything right, so just note, just try to figure out what they're doing is right, what they're doing that probably could be done better.
But he did say that. What about, another question, how did your career on Wall Street prepare you to move into the work you're doing now as a consultant?
Well, one is, offered up with the example of my friend with his website, it's the fact that I learned procedure and whatnot, and how shall I say, the way you vet project proposals, which is also something I did back in AT&T. And also did at Touche Ross when we were dealing with advising companies that wanted to make acquisitions and the like. And then just in general, learning business processes, how you go about developing business plans and thinking in terms of what your marketing strategy is going to be, your pricing strategy. Just all those basic things you learn if you're in the right position within a company, and the fact that I had essentially a cross-functional career at Merrill Lynch in finance. I was also in marketing, so I just know enough of the right questions to ask, and if I don't know the answers, I've met enough people that I know who to turn to for more specific advice. But another thing, we're mentioning this in the office, and I don't mean to be flippant about this, but this is also something my friend with his website, being a very frugal guy. One of the things my father taught me at a very early age, you know, this again, we're talking about going back in the 1960s when most people still thought in terms of long-term and if not lifetime employment with a single employer. He said, it's a lot of nonsense. The day inevitably will come this way, you know, it's a very blunt talking guy, when they get tired of looking at you and they go, he says, the terminology he used to use, and some people use, he always say, pay yourself first. Has anyone ever heard that terminology?
Yeah.
Pay yourself, and what do you think it means, as you've heard it used?
Yeah, basically, if you get money, basically use some of it for fun first, and then get rid of all the debt.
Yeah, well, sort of. Well, maybe we're on basically the same thing. Essentially, what he meant by this is make your first priority building up a pile of savings. Live frugally, build up a pile of savings. Then he said, when that day comes, when the company says, we're tired of looking at it, then you don't have to worry where your next meal is going.
And what did your dad do?
It was very simple. When he got out of the Navy after World War II, he went to night school, got his undergrad degree at night. He was the first member of his family to go to college. And then he worked while he was doing that, he worked a day job, which was not a white collar job. I don't know exactly what he was essentially an internal postman and whatnot at the big, what was then Standard Oil, now Exxon plant in Bayonne, New Jersey. And then he moved from that to being a personnel manager at a major insurance company here in New York. And then for a short time, he worked for the state of New Jersey not in a motor vehicle agency, but in the central office of motor vehicles, which is very frustrating. Essentially, as a computer programmer, and that was very frustrating. As you said, the internal politics there, and the incompetence and the political hacks there in the division of motor vehicles in Trenton was beyond belief. So he left that, and then wound up with a job as essentially called as a traffic manager with a company that, of all things, marketed dehydrated garlic and onion. But a key ingredient to a lot of condiments, a key ingredient used by a lot of restaurants. So he essentially was I think you'd call it traffic manager, because he had to help schedule shipments across the country from the farmers in California whose product was bought by this firm and then dehydrated and then shipped around the country. And then the company essentially went out of business in the early 80s, and he was a man still in his 50s, but not in his 50s, he was essentially very tough to find a job. So he essentially was forced to retire in his 50s, but because he had been a diligent saver and because he had spent a lot of time learning the stock market and investing, It was not a crisis. Yeah, he would have liked to continue to work, but he had enough money, and actually when he died, he was actually worth more money than when he was laid off, because he continued to be very frugal and whatnot, and invest on this, something he taught me earlier. He says, first thing you gotta learn is pay yourself first. He says, your number one priority should be learning how to handle money and invest it in growth. So I took that lesson at a very early age, and so I was always paranoid about getting laid off and whatnot, or having crises that require a lot of money. So a well-paying job on the street, not as well-paying as most, because I will say, looking back, I could manage my career a lot better. But I was telling Professor Manlow before class, I was making only a tiny fraction of what my immediate superior was, this woman who reported to Wonder Woman. And this woman reported to Wonder Woman, Mark, I don't know, I have no money to spend on some kids. Donna, what are you making? Sure, you're making $300,000. I see another $400,000. You have no money? Your husband's a broker man. What is wrong with this picture? You say, oh, Mark, I envy you. Because I'm sort of broadcasting, they believe it. I said, I have money. I say, you people get me fed up. I'm out of here. I so envy you, Mark. Well, I was telling the truth. Just being frugal and smart about what I said. People make. I saw this at Merrill. That dichotomy.
It's been very fast.
Here's a financial firm where you figure people will be savvy about money and saving it, and maybe at the top executive levels they were very savvy. Well, they made millions of dollars a year, so they did fine. Like Lonnie Steph's forced down to become this vintner in California, but other people were making absolutely fantastic sums of money. And what did they blow it on? Beyond belief. But this is something I learned at a young age, and I had experience with immigrant grandparents and their relatives and friends. These people who made like zilch, and they died and left significant legacies because they were very frugal. And that's really the key. What I've learned, you can only be so smart about investing. The real key is frugality. Pay yourself or sock it away. So, long story short, yeah, I got myself in some relatively well-paying job, but not in the upper echelon of pay. But I think I walked away with more in the bank than a lot of people who are making multiples of what I did. And so there's some trepidation of leaving the security of getting a regular paycheck. I say, it's now or never. I want to do my own thing. I just had enough of being a cog in the corporate wheel, especially since the corporation was going off in direction I didn't think was suitable for me, and just about all the friends I had at Merrill, I kept in contact with them. They say, Mark, you did the right thing bailing out. If only I had the means to do so. Well, Sean, I know you got the problem. You got the house, you got the kids and whatnot. And Mark, you did the right thing. Even my broker, who's a former Merrill guy, now working for different firms. Mark, you did the right thing bailing out. So, if you can, please, be smart about personal budgeting and saving. It'll just reduce. And I know there are other realities. You have expenses in life, but I see so many people at all income levels who just don't get good value for the dollars they spend, and later come to regret it.
I can have it very quickly.
Oh yes.
So I think we're almost at the end of class. Are there any other questions? Anyone has a question? Well, it's been you've covered quite a vast.
Okay, well, hopefully this will be useful. It's been sort of a long line in the road, but hopefully hopefully I'll be able to give you some rambling thoughts that are of any use.
And I guess something